Hey guys, one of our patrons has asked for comment on the recent Japan-China shenanigans. So, as some of you guys are aware, politics isn't really a popular topic in our house. We're not really into thinking or talking about politics. However, there have been some things that I've observed this week that I will tell our friend about. So, most of you are probably already aware, the new Japanese Prime Minister, Takaichi, made a comment about Taiwan and about her support, or Japanese government's support of Taiwan. And obviously that really upset the Chinese government. They got really unhappy about it. And they issued a travel warning to Chinese people to say that there's been an increase in Chinese people being arrested in Japan, and that Chinese people should not travel to Japan at the moment, right? Which is seems to be false. By all reports, it seems to be a false thing, just to stop. So the idea, obviously, the Chinese government was to damage Japan by cutting the Chinese tourism, which is huge in Japan. So what they've achieved is, first of all, we know that there's been some, because of all this talk, there's been some Japanese-owned businesses in China that have suffered as a result. There's been some Chinese-owned businesses in Japan. I mean, we know a lady here that works for a bus company that's owned by a Chinese company, and she said that this month their business has dropped by 90%, because obviously a large percentage of their business is Chinese tourists. So that's a Chinese-owned business that's been affected by a Chinese government thing. And obviously the Japanese government will be aware of the loss of revenue, because China is one of the biggest sources of tourism, inbound tourism in Japan. So as the Chinese government expected, it's going to have a negative effect on the Japanese economy to a certain extent. So that's what they've managed to achieve with what they've done. However, it's been sort of amusing to watch the reaction on the news, but also in social media and so on. No diplomatic. I actually have we have a couple of Chinese friends in Japan. One of them is the lady that works for that bus company, and there's another Chinese lady that we know as well, and they're lovely people, and they've got our full support. We're not talking about the Chinese people, we're talking about the Chinese government, right? We're talking about the Chinese government, but the reaction has been one of happiness from the Japanese people, because Japanese people don't really have any issues with Chinese people, except that the big numbers of Chinese tourists can make some places that we visit less pleasant. So obviously busloads, and this isn't just because they're Chinese. I mean, you busloads of tourists from anywhere going to your favourite place, it's going to make it less enjoyable, you know. And there have been, the last couple of years, there's been huge numbers of Chinese tourists. Busloads of them everywhere we go, which is why the Chinese government's using this as a weapon, because they know that this has been the case, that Japan's been a popular tourist destination for Chinese people. So they've done this to try and damage Japan, but and no doubt it's had some negative effect as far as the Japanese government's concerned, but the Japanese people are quite happy, right? Because suddenly all these places that were extremely busy with busloads of Chinese tourists are suddenly not. And there's been pictures in the mainstream media and so on of places that are usually full of tourists that are suddenly way less busy. So the Japanese people are quite happy with this situation, and the foreigners living in Japan have been saying similar stuff, that they're pretty happy too, because suddenly their favourite places that they like to go are not full of Chinese tourists all of a sudden. So someone actually sarcastically suggested that the Chinese government should have threatened to send more tourists rather than less. A couple other things just came to mind too that we've seen as a result of this. A couple of aspects of this is, one is the Chinese airline refunded all the Chinese people who cancelled their plane tickets were all refunded in full with no penalty. However, when the Chinese people then tried to get refunds from the Japanese places that they'd booked, hotels and so on, obviously the hotel owners are not obliged to. That's why you pay a deposit, right? You pay a deposit at the hotel in case you cancel, so the hotel gets some compensation for that empty room that had been previously booked and held for you, right? So as we all know, usually if you book a hotel and then you don't show up, whatever deposit you paid usually is forfeited, isn't it? So there's been a bit of a drama about that. The Chinese customers have been complaining that the hotels aren't refunding them their money, which they're not really obliged to, are they? So yeah, there's been a lot of this, as you can see from what I've told you. This is just what's popped up. I'm not particularly interested in this topic, but it's been hard to avoid it this week, which is why our friend asked the question, because it's been fairly sort of in our face this week, this particular topic. So yeah, the situation is obviously not good between Japan and China at the moment. Oh, Japan also fired a missile within, was it 100 kilometers of Taiwan or something? So yeah, there's a bit of unwise chest thumping going on by the Japanese and the Chinese. The Chinese have been doing provocative stuff for years. You know, they'll bring their battleships into Japanese waters and their Coast Guard ships and all sorts of provocative behaviour like that. So yeah, lots of stupid behaviour amongst the politicians. You know, it sort of brings to mind. We've seen stuff over the years between Japan and different countries. The other one is South Korea, and it's really interesting because Japanese people like lots of stuff about South Korea. We have a couple of friends who visit South Korea all the time because from central Japan you can be in Seoul in an hour and a half, and so we know a couple of people that like to go over for the weekend, a couple of young ladies actually, and they go over for the weekend and just spend the weekend eating food in restaurants and shopping, and then come back again. As you guys probably know, K-pop, Korean pop music, and Korean food, Korean shopping, Korean boy bands. There's lots of Korean stuff that's the Japanese people like, and vice versa. There's lots of Korean people who write in Japanese stuff as well. So the Japanese people and the Korean people don't really have issues with each other, but the governments do. You know, and this is the sort of thing we see all the time, isn't it? That, you know, two groups of people have no real problems with each other at all, but the governments do. So a little bit the same with this China-Japan thing, because the Chinese people that we live in Japan, really nice people, and you know, they're hard-working people, and ironically, what the Chinese government's doing at the moment is actually affecting them directly, because you know their income comes from Chinese tourists, so their income's been affected directly, you know, and vice versa. We know Japanese people who travel to China. Lots of Japanese companies have premises in China as well, and factories and all that sort of thing. And of course, that's making that hard for them as well at the moment. And apparently, Japanese restaurants, all sorts of Japan-owned businesses in China are having a hard time at the moment because all this propaganda stuff, you know, that's going on. So anyway, for our friend that asked, that's the observations that I'd have for you. That's what we've seen. A lot of silly behaviour, really. You know, it doesn't matter how much technology we get, people still behave, or governments, leaders still behave as stupidly as they did 5,000 years ago. You know, there hasn't been a lot of improvement as far as civilized behaviour, threatening each other with weapons and all sorts of stupid behaviour. So yeah, we just keep going about our business and hoping that nobody does anything too stupid. So there's no guarantee of that, is there? And this Taiwan thing doesn't look like it's going to get better. It looks like the Chinese government are pretty set. Apparently there's a lot of pressure on the leaders there, the Chinese leaders from the other members, that they need to be strong on Taiwan, and of course there's a lot of pressure on the Japanese leaders that they've got to be strong on Taiwan, and of course the Taiwanese people seem to want to stay independent of China, and So it's just a big mess, really. Can't see it resolving easily. But hopefully no one does anything too stupid, because we've seen what can happen with Russia and Ukraine. These things aren't easily or uneasily resolved without a lot of pain, are they? So hopefully common sense will prevail, but it seems extremely unlikely. Anybody who's done any sort of study of history at all will know that common sense is a rare commodity amongst leaders of countries around the world. This will be no exception, no doubt. Anyway, hopefully someone enjoyed the night cruise, if not the silly topic. More videos coming soon.